So we want to turn our latest youth development into the next batch of FM23 Wonderkids. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how I set up my youth development training. So I'm sure there's no shortage of videos that claim to show you the optimal way of developing your youth players in FM23. I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is to show you how I train my youth players, and over recent versions of Football Manager, I've had no shortage of youth-only saves on my own YouTube channel, and this is how I try to develop my youngsters. So for this, I've started a save with Everton, who've had some pretty decent academy products coming through in recent years. Now, according to the star ratings from the coaching staff, it doesn't look like the current under-18 squad is blessed with too much talent, but let's see if we can develop a training regime that might help develop their ability. And let's start by explaining how my youth development training might differ from my first team training. Well, for my first team squad, the emphasis is going to be on trying to win matches. And as part of that, as well as making sure that I have lots of match preparation training, I'm also going to prioritize other aspects of training, such as maybe making sure that a couple of times a week, they might be working on various aspects of set pieces. I'm also going to want to try and keep morale up, so I might have multiple extracurricular sessions during a week. And by the time I've added in all of the training that I think might help me to win games at a weekend, and especially if you're at a club that might have midweek games thrown in as well, it might mean that you're so busy in the cut and thrust of your league campaign that you don't have as much time as you would like to make sure that you can focus on developing players' attributes. But when it comes to youth development training, winning matches is not as important to me as developing players' attributes and getting them ready for the first team. And although I might have competitive fixtures that my under-18 squad play, it doesn't mean that I need to use lots of my training sessions prioritizing the elements of training that might get them ready for a match day. Instead, I like to try and focus my training on the three aspects of a player's attributes, so that we have sessions that target players' physical attributes, as well as those focusing on their mental attributes, and then the sessions that might help improve the technical aspects to their game. Now, of course, some of these sessions will affect more than one of the different attribute areas of the game, but I find it useful to try and make sure that I'm scheduling different sessions that will try and hit those three different attribute areas of your young prospects. So let's try and implement that into a week-long training program. And for this, we'll assume that we have just one game for our youth players that week taking place on a Saturday. Well, the first thing that we can do is to use session 1 from various days of the week to try and hit those players' physical attributes. So we could put in an endurance session, we could then wait another day and put in a resistance session, and then towards the end of the week, we could put in a quickness session. And of course, if we wanted to provide some kind of variety in our regime so that players aren't doing the same sessions week in, week out, we could create a second regime for an alternative week where we perhaps put in some physical training that will hit all of the different physical attributes that a player might have. Now, physical sessions, especially the quickness session, might take a lot out of your players. And of course, the enemy of youth development is long-term injury. So personally, I find 3 physical sessions in a week enough, and in those other spare days, I like to try and schedule some sessions for the goalkeepers, which for me have dual importance. Firstly, they allow your young goalkeepers to develop, but secondly, whilst the goalkeepers are doing their training, you'll notice that your attacking and defensive units are focusing on their individual roles. Another area that is crucial for targeted youth development, and one that we'll look at in a future video. Next, we can move on to session 2 of each of our days, where we might try and focus on more of the mental attributes of our young players, and to do that, I quite like some of the general sessions that are available to you. A session like defending, for example, might have some technical improvements for players, such as focusing on their heading, their tackling, their technique, but it also focuses on several areas of their mental game as well, such as their anticipation, concentration, their aggression and decision-making and positioning, as well as their teamwork and work rate. In fact, general sessions like possession, as well as scheduling, a bit of tactical training, are all good with the mental attributes that your young players have. Now, you might have some concerns about scheduling sessions such as general defending training, where your entire team are going to be focused on defensive aspects of their play. But if we look once more at the attributes that are going to be targeted, many of these are going to be useful for your attacking players, such as your wingers and your strikers, to improve on. Positioning can be important for forward-thinking players when they come back to defend set pieces. Anticipation and decision-making can be crucial for playmakers. Teamwork and work rate are essential for a good pressing forward. And attributes such as technique are going to be useful for your attacking players. And we should also add that a defensive team training session also has secondary impacts on attributes such as crossing, dribbling, finishing, first touch, and a whole host of other areas that your attacking players will need to perfect. And then in two of these other vacant areas of our session 2s during the week, I like to try and schedule two of my absolute favourite sessions for improving a youth player's mental attributes, and that is transition press as well as transition restrict. Now again, these sessions will hit some technical attributes such as passing and tackling, but they'll also focus in on your youngsters' anticipation, concentration, positioning and teamwork. But the transition press session will also focus on a player's aggression, which along with the team defending training is one of the few training sessions you can put on that will improve a player's aggression attribute. And once we've got sessions in our weekly program that might improve players physically as well as mentally, it's time to zero in on how we can try and improve their technical skills. Now, this is just a personal preference that you may decide that you don't agree with, but when I'm developing youth players, I do favour all-round development, which means I want my defensive-minded players to also improve their attacking attributes, and by a similar token, I want my forward-thinking players to improve some of the defensive areas of their game whilst they're young. So when scheduling technical sessions for the youth players, I like to try and schedule a session for defensive players that will focus in on their key defensive attributes of marking, tackling, concentration and positioning. But then I'll want a session later on in the week that focuses on defenders' attacking attributes, and a good session for this is attacking overlap sessions, where the primary focus is your defensive unit, and rather than focusing on attributes such as tackling and marking, it will target crossing, dribbling, finishing, long shots, anticipation, and even off the ball. Now for me, this is such a useful session because you're going to have fullbacks that you're going to be developing in your youth squads, and depending on the formation that you're playing, they might even be wing backs, and you may appreciate trying to develop the more attacking aspects of their game. But even for a centre-back, improving their anticipation can be useful, and if you favour a style of play such as a gegenpress, have a look at what your attacking players will be focusing on as part of the secondary focus of the session. They'll be working on their own heading and marking and tackling and concentration and positioning, which might help you to win the ball back. But we're also going to want to make sure that we have sessions to develop our attacking players and make them the priority. So a session such as attacking wings will mean that it is our attacking unit that is receiving the priority during this training session. And this can help improve important areas of their game, such as their anticipation, crossing, dribbling, finishing, heading, off the ball movement and technique. But as I did with the defenders, when it comes to the attacking players, I might want a session that improves the defensive aspect of our attacking players in the youth team. Now, a perfect session for this would be defending from the front, where the attacking unit is given the primary focus, but the attributes we're trying to hit with this session are heading, marking, tackling, concentration and positioning. Now again, in systems where our attacking players are important when we are out of possession, trying to improve our youngsters' defensive side of the game might be important in those kind of tactics. Now that leaves us with 3 more sessions that we can utilise, and for the first of those I like to head back into the general tab where we've already got defending, goalkeeping, possession and tactical training, and I like to add in attacking as well. And this will mean that our entire youth squad, even those fullbacks that we're trying to help develop in an attacking sense, will be working on important attributes such as their crossing and their off-the-ball movement. But there's still things in this session for your centre halves, such as the first touch, the heading, the passing, the technique and the composure, as well as the vision for more creative central defenders that you might have in your squad. And then That brings us to our final 2 sessions, and we've previously mentioned how injury is the enemy of youth development, so I like to put a second recovery session in during the week. But another important area of youth development is making sure players are happy with their training, so for our final session of the week, I like to choose one of the 2 extracurricular activities. Now at this point you might be thinking, isn't this training all very general? What if I've got a youth player who looks like he could be a corner taker or free kick taker for my first team? Or what if I've got a player that's come through that looks like they could be a star but has one particular weakness to their game? Well, don't worry. This is where their individual training comes in, and we'll focus on that in a future video. So now we've got all of the sessions that I would like to hit during my first week of my youth development program, but I'm not sure we've quite got them in the perfect order yet. And I think we might have created a schedule that might induce injuries for players, especially on Fridays, which heading into a match day looks a little too intensive for my taste. Now, the first thing that we could do to try and prevent injury is just to swap the sessions that are in for a Friday over onto the Thursday, so that the day before our youth game, the players have a lighter day training. The next thing we could do to balance our training is to take this recovery session and maybe move it onto the Thursday, which is our most intensive training day of the week. And to lighten that even further, we could also take the team bonding session and swap it with the attacking session, so that moves to the Sunday, and our team bonding is on the Thursday. Now, the other concern we might have is that our goalkeepers look like they're working very hard on a Wednesday, despite the fact that it's the Tuesday that our dedicated goalkeeping session is put on. Well, again, we can just try and tweak and manipulate our sessions, just swap them around with each other until we've got a balance that we're content with. And hopefully what we're going to be left with is a week-long training regime that's going to balance the risk of injury with improving our players' attributes, but is also going to be a session that is improving players regardless of their position on the pitch. Now, a personal preference of mine is to not use the same week-long training block every single week of the season. So I might use this week as a base, but create different varieties of it where I try and change up some of the different sessions that the players are doing to give them a little bit more variety in their training and potentially change the attribute emphasis of a week of training. For example, in pre-season, we might want to double down on the physical training that we're giving to our players to try and get them ready for the new campaign. Or later in the season, we might want to really zero in on some of the technical attributes of our game to try and improve this aspect of our young stars. Now, I'll reiterate, I'm not claiming that this is the one best way to set up training for your youth players. This is my approach based on a philosophy of trying to create rounded development for all players so that defensive players improve their attacking elements of their game and the attacking players do likewise. And after a month of this approach, you can see that our players are starting to respond. After 2 months, we start to observe more significant gains. And after 3 months, our youth players really start to see the benefits. And after 4 months, some of them are flying. And if you're looking for more hints and tips videos for FM23, why not check out this video next?